My main question to all of you is what is like maybe one key important fact that you want the audience to take away from your presentation, something that will sit with them and that they can kind of action in the work that they do.
Where do you want to start?
Just a free for all. I'll go.
Ian, do you want to start?
Okay, yeah. Must admit, doing it so quickly, I'm not even sure if I got across what my key point was. I think the thing I was sort of most interested in, or trying to get across, was that even with the growth of home entertainment options available, that isn't the death of cinemas. I think cinemas are going to continue to be an integral part of our viewing experience, as sort of was highlighted, that there's much more to a cinema than just the content that's being shown there, and them being like a social centre, places where you could perhaps engage in VR things in the future. And I think that's the key thing, that cinemas are there, they're an integral part of UK high streets, and I think as long as they're savvy, they'll carry on doing that, even if the content there is different to what we'd expect it to be today.
Anyone else jump in?
So I would just like to repeat what I've basically said before. I think just listening to the diversity of opinions and acting on them, hopefully along those 5 guidelines, and really just thinking about old-fashioned, learning, such as the pyramid of needs. I think if you combine these two, then you're really meeting what your audience or what your consumer is thinking and feeling, and how you can build on that for your own initiative.
So from my point of view, besides toilets, obviously, women's toilets in particular, please,
Yes.
I would say that what we learned from this is around having exclusive content, but also starting with a film and working backwards. So what else can you add into, a little bit about like the immersive experience, but increasingly people are looking for something else. You know, they are making a night of it or a day of it. They're making a bit of it's an event in its own right. So what else? What else can you provide for them? What else can they get out of the experience besides the hour and a half, 2 hours they might spend in the cinema?
So I would ask you to think about how people might connect in the future and interact and create and empathise more, because I think that appetites for these are growing. And regardless of what the technology looks like, I think that how we experience stories is going to be a very different thing in 2030. So I just ask you to think about what that might mean.
Thanks. I guess because I'm in an evidence gathering mode at the moment for our Horizon scan, I would flip the panel and I would ask you guys, what do you think is going to be the driver of change in some of these things? Shifting, Ian's point is, cinemas are still going to be there. Caroline's point is we've got all of this exciting new, immersive way of doing stuff and pulling in ideas from other art forms, and that could all come into the cinema. Is it going to be a pull from audiences and all of their needs, as other people on the panel have described, the changes in needs from audiences? Is it going to be a sort of a funding issue or a kind of corporate issue from different companies? Or is it going to be something else that actually changes the shape of what people are doing in 10 years' time? And I suppose I'm just sharing my challenge with you, because that's our challenge for the project, I guess. And I'd be really interested to see whether there's any reflections in people's questions and their thoughts on that.
Anyone else? Exactly.
I think for me it would be the outputs that we get in terms of time spent from that unique single source database, because that really is going to be the very first time that we'll have the ability to look at time spent in such granularity across all the media or visual entertainment landscape, and to really put all these different lenses on that in terms of demographics, life stages, and so forth. So there's so many questions that we can throw at this data once we've got it in our hands, so it's certainly something that I'm really excited about.
One thing I wanted to ask is this, making this a whole day of, maybe not a day, but a whole experience where you try and satisfy so many needs. What's the reality for? What is the reality for all of that? Because we're looking at maybe incorporating gaming, some sort of live event. We've talked food, comfortableness, somewhere so people can sit and debate, plus watching a film. Where's the balance when it comes to costs for the audience and actually the people putting on these events? That's a lot of considerations, and then you might still hit the mark because you're trying to do too much. So what's the reality in trying to incorporate all these needs for a very demanding audience goer?
I think it depends on the situation. I think it was Esther's slide that showed it's about the situation and about the personal need. And as Rebecca showed, when you come to a film festival, you're in event mode. You're wanting the experience, you're wanting everything, you're wanting to share it with other people, you're seeing something for the first time that's really unique. I think, as some of our qualitative research showed, there are other people that you just go to the cinema, you buy a ticket, it's only the same as a couple of pints of beer, and you don't need necessarily to be able to talk about it afterwards. So I think it entirely, there are different types of situation that hopefully we will identify in our project on the way through.
Sorry, go on.
I'll just answer quickly. I don't know if you've heard that Secret Cinema was bought by Disney. So Disney make more money out of their experiences than they do anything else now. So whether that's their theme parks, their merchandise. So from a money point of view, people are really wanting to spend on experiences, especially in China and Asia. So there's proof there that that's definitely the trajectory, I think,
So though all this study about the importance of film, it still seems like film is becoming slightly redundant in the moment. Is it? I mean, is that a bit too bold to say?
I think Secret Cinema enhances cinema, doesn't it? So it's coming from your Rocky Horror base, basically, that the lady was talking about there. We funded a company called Live Cinema who do something really similar. So I don't think it is taking away, actually. It's just, but it is that nostalgia stuff about favourite films and experiencing them together. But it is bringing new audiences into that space, so it's not a bad thing.
And also, I guess it could be about the direction of travel. It doesn't have to be that in 10 years' time, instead of people going down the local Odeon and having some popcorn and watching Frozen 2, they are doing some all singing, all dance. Everyone's shifted to an all singing, all dancing immersive thing. It could just be that there's more of the Secret Cinema type stuff around. And crucially, I think it'd be interesting to see where there might be market failures of that to deliver that to diverse audiences. Because we have got this problem about, we're all white and elderly and posh in the arts, both on the delivery side and on the consumption side. And if actually some of these ideas can help spread the types of experiences people have, maybe taking it away from traditional cinema might be quite a good thing to some groups, because it moves it into some other space of entertainment.
I put a focus on the top films being somewhat less diverse. It slightly buries things because buried in there are more diverse films such as Black Panther. But your broad point I do accept. But I think there is a diversity of the titles that are available in cinemas now, especially compared to a decade ago. If you look at just this week, something like Parasite is taking huge takings at the box office, based off the fact of a sort of cinematic release, an Oscar, an Oscar win. In reading for this, I was reading someone who I could just read consistently or listen to talk was Barry Jenkins, the director of Moonlight, and his idea that had he made Moonlight and not made it into a film but into like a TV program that was going to be released onto a streaming thing, it wouldn't get the audience, it wouldn't get attention, you wouldn't have Mahershala Ali winning back-to-back Oscars for that, and that's that different type of diverse films being released to a larger audience. It is something that's going to hopefully be available. I think you might disagree with me on that one. Yeah.
I also wanted to add that yes, maybe diversity is not reflected enough, and actually I agree with you. And I hope that the research that we have done, even though, we did what we did, and we are not finished yet. But yes, it will highlight its importance more. However, I want to add something from another angle, which was not shared with you today, and it's the fact that we were fortunate enough to talk to some storytellers and some producers who sit behind and who create top money shows, but also less budget heavy films as well. And what we heard from them is that they are trying to get new experiences, and they are trying to expand their horizon as well. They are there to learn, but they are limited in their resources as well. So yes, often they rely on their own paths, which might seem privileged, and lack of diversity. So my point, of course, coming from a researcher's point of view, is that maybe if they get access to nuanced and detailed research pieces, or just some verbatim from our participants, then it just helps them bring this to life and realize that if you want to create a diverse content, or you want to include different types of people, you don't need to be really creative and stressed out about what to write, because what we heard was that people do go to the cinema, just to feel kicked. I know it's not related anything to content, but also to see any film whatsoever, not just blockbusters. I know that, for instance, I only talked about blockbusters as one of the drivers of paying money to go to the cinema. But for some people, it's not even about that. It's all about going out and just spending time in the company of others. So basically, to wrap up what I'm rambling on, is that I think if the storytellers, and I'm not trying to defend them, but if we help them, diversify their mindset, or just tell them stories with very, very detailed information, then hopefully that just works to everyone's advantage.
I think also, if I can jump in, Doris, you hit the hottest topic of our industry at the moment, I think. And I think we don't know enough about the relationships between what happens off screen, what happens on screen, and then how that plays through to audiences. Yvonne did mention that we're looking very closely at that at the moment. And we're really interested, if we can, to do some ethnography, to start right at the beginning of a production process and see how it plays through, so that we can understand more about the dynamics. I think we don't understand enough about the dynamics in order to really predict how we can facilitate change.
I just wanted to add one small thing to that as well. I think that's a really, really important point. And when you look widely at the future, it's vital to think, where are the new voices going to come from? One area we're looking at is things like how the technology can support diversity of voices. So micro payments and different ways of looking for and buying content, and different ways that people can make content, and then different ways people can get it to different audiences. So your point to the distribution and the delivery of content, actually the way that's done might diversify the market. There's a lot of talk about branded content at the moment, and that may not be, there's debate about whether that's the best thing for art or not, but it also may mean that brands who speak to audiences who are not traditional cinema-going audiences may then be enabled to then make content, make very rich, deep, perhaps more short-form content that then starts to get people involved in telling stories in a visual way or in an immersive way, and that could bring more audiences in. And for older people as well, just a final point about your point about older audiences, a lot of older people are using technologies now in ways that they don't even know that they're necessarily using new sorts of technology. So you'll have people in our surveys saying, I don't use technology very much at all, and then when you talk to them more, they Skype their grandchildren every week, but they don't think that they're using any sort of social media involving a screen, because they don't see it as, they see that as a sort of posh phone call. So there's all different ways that people are understanding, where they're starting from, and perhaps the new technology can help people move towards the world of film, but through new ways.
There's somebody at the front, if you could pass the mic. But I just wanted to quickly add, who, with all the research that's being done, who is the person or the people being visualised as this research is being done? Because I'm looking at it, I myself am feeling like it's quite middle class focused. That's just my interpretation, and I didn't see anybody from my community spoken to, so I don't know if that's happened and it just wasn't visualised. So it's just, who is the person in mind, because that will affect results, because there is a need to speak to other groups, not just, I represent British Black creatives, but there are other marginalised groups who need to be spoken to and understood their needs. People with alternative abilities, accessibility, things like that are important, and so it's just wondering who you guys have in mind when doing this research, and how much the funding expands, including the marginalised groups that are important to the footprint of this evolution.
I think it depends on how the project is scoped out. That I would always say that we would, sometimes you want to look at a nationally representative audience because you want a true picture of what you think the UK is like. But other times you might specifically, I know with the qualitative work, we did have a very diverse group. You probably didn't see it, as we only had 4 or 5 people there in the clips, but it was a diverse group of people. And I think sometimes it's harder to reach those people. We do have challenges, I think, and anyone from an agency here that can recommend how better we can talk to some of the minority groups, we'd love to hear from you. So.
Gentleman at the front, please.
Patrick Towell, I'm the Innovation Director of the Audience Agency. So we've just started work with Julia and her team on evaluating the BFI National Film and TV Archive, and thinking about kind of product category and substitutes rather than competitors. So just wondering if if screen entertainment is the right category for some of this. And when we say visual entertainment, that should in theory include live performance, theatre, dance, all of those kinds of things. And just thinking about how, for instance, what was identified in the talks, for which thank you very much, event cinema being a kind of a persistent part now, a very significant part, the experiential elements of the film going, and the way that can be satisfied by other things that are not screen, and just kind of looking sideways to other industries where in a sense the recorded in music has switched back where the live's the dominant, and indeed in revenue terms, merchandise and other associated revenues, and thinking about, in a sense, the non-moving image bits of the internet, which I suspect are stealing at the right-hand side of the diagram of the younger screen consumption. It would be really interesting to see that analysed not just by moving image, or if you know what I mean. So I suppose that's a question of, in a sense, where do we draw the line of scope of product category, and what do we think about these substitutes rather than competitors?
I think, I'm not sure whether this answers your question, but one thing I was trying to say is that things are really merging, and I'm not sure these definitions will be around in 10 years, or they will matter so much. And some people are very worried about that. Other people see it as a great opportunity. I think it is an opportunity because I think there's a lot to be learned there. And I've no question long-form film will survive. But what you're starting to see is a lot of fringe things coming off that, like second screen activity. We've had this for years, or games that belong to the film. But, you know, how is that going to make film? Perhaps it's still on a screen. Maybe it's even still in a cinema. But is it more interactive while you're there? Is there an audio companion that you listen to on the train? Could that film be split up into, like, on the way there and on the way home, there's something else that happens? And that doesn't diminish the 2-hour experience. It's just all the stuff around it that people are starting to look at now. So just a suggestion of where that could go.
I think time's escaping us, but we might have time for one quick question. Maybe, no, one. I don't want to get in trouble.
Hello, hi. I am Sam. I'm a researcher at the University of York. I'm currently engaged with the XR Stories project. Caroline has presented as part of the panel. I noticed a slight conflict across a couple of the presentations in terms of the types of audiences that we're seeing and expect to see, and different kinds of engagement or interactivity with screen content. So on the one hand, from the video diary, we saw a young person talking about how they put their TV on as a kind of background activity, which commanded little of their attention, versus what Caroline was talking about, which was a kind of an XR experience whereby the whole point was that the audience was extremely focused and participant. And so I wonder if in 2030 we expect to see a growth in both or either of those types of audience type.
I think this is a really interesting theme that we're just wrestling with at the moment, is why is content made, and who's it made for, and who's making money out of it, and what do you want people to do with it? Because actually, if it's just about a subscription which delivers eyeballs to something in order to target advertising, then actually it doesn't matter if someone's watching the programme or not, as long as they've got the channel on. So the kind of content that's made feeds that market, that type of marketing. Or that there's a really interesting theme coming up now, which is that the idea of something being longer and that making it inherently more valuable for young audiences is almost like the opposite now, because actually quite often you're asked to look at something in order to see something else online. So you have to watch a load of adverts before you see the thing you want on YouTube, for example. So actually saying, you pay more or, subscribe more to get longer form may be something that feels sort of inherently unstable to younger audiences in the future. And so the type of content that's made may be made in different ways. It may be about putting your attention somewhere in order to get value. So I think the things that will be made won't necessarily be because of the type of content that, let's start from the type of content we want to make. Things may be made because of the sorts of markets that are there. And therefore that might be in practice what we see changing. And if we don't want that to happen, we need to work out what we want people to see, and then how to deliver it to them in a way that's that's funded either publicly or privately. So I think that sort of underlies the question a bit.
And just very quickly to add to that, there's complete immersion experience, and then there's the background thing, but you also have mixed reality in the middle. So Facebook and Apple and everyone are talking about these glasses they're going to bring out. And the other layer of that is like the AR cloud, where we're literally talking about living in a mirrorverse where we're in the world, but there's this thing on top. And how will story work in that, where it really is in our world and it's there. And we don't know what that's going to look like, but there is something in between that's a mix of both of those things that probably looks like much of a market leader than complete immersion. So I don't know, but
I think the two have lived happily forever, to be honest with you. The immersion of the cinema versus doing the ironing while you're having the TV on while you're doing the ironing has happened forever. I think what I referred to, which is really interesting, is how things like phones are changing that, because phones are very personalised. It's not the sort of thing that I think groups of people gather around. So I think we need to understand more about how different devices, how different methods of distribution are affecting those need states of either having it as background or wanting to feel completely immersed.